What Queen Camilla just realized behind closed doors is that a secret broadcast coup can be permanently dismantled by a single centuries-old military protocol in less than 24 hours. What was meticulously orchestrated to be her ultimate visual ascension during the trooping. The colour parade became the most suffocating institutional reprimand she has ever faced. The realization was immediate and freezing as her state carriage rolled onto the Horse Guards parade, under the flashing lenses of global television cameras. She expected to be the absolute unchallenged focal point of the military spectacle, having quietly ordered the broadcast crews and household cavalry to isolate her carriage at the visual center of the formation. Instead, as the majestic parade began, she found her carriage deliberately flanked, overshadowed, and pushed to the visual margins. Riding majestically past her mounted on horseback in full military uniform and radiating an untouchable sovereign authority, was Princess Anne, flanked closely by Prince William. Despite the crown on her head, Camilla was just brutally reminded that she does not command the military aesthetic of the true bloodline. This is the story of a cold, tactical purge executed with terrifying administrative precision and weaponized restraint. Today we are going to unpack the quiet systemic counteroffensive launched by the Princess Royal to neutralize Camilla's audacious attempt to hijack the visual identity of the British Armed Forces. We will examine the secret broadcast and formation directives the Queen Consort attempted to push through the household division, how Princess Anne uncovered this staggering exploitation of military spectacle, and the silent, ruthless retaliation that followed. Most importantly, we will analyze the chilling psychological climax that left Camilla visually isolated in front of the entire world. Realizing that her 30-year campaign to conquer the institution has just been permanently blocked by the unyielding guardians of the military protocol. To understand the absolute devastation of this exact moment, we have to rebuild the staggering illusion of absolute power Camilla had constructed for herself. For 30 years, she played the longest, most patient, and most calculating game in modern royal history. She survived the intense public fury of the 1990s, methodically outlasted the hostility of the old aristocratic guard, and watched the total institutional erasure of Princess Diana's legacy within the palace walls. She slowly and carefully replaced the ghosts of the past with her own loyal courtiers, her own favoured press contacts, and her own private secretaries. By the time the crown was placed on her head at Westminster Abbey, the transition felt entirely complete. She believed she had King Charles completely controlled and that the institution had finally totally surrendered to her will. In her mind, she had successfully transformed from the realm's most hated mistress into its untouchable matriarch. The magnificent royal residences felt like her personal properties, and the sovereign's authority felt like her ultimate impenetrable shield. This is the profound danger of surviving a long, bitter war of attrition. You begin to mistake sheer endurance for absolute boundless authority. Camilla began to operate under the dangerous assumption that the entire visual and military machinery of the state was now permanently structured around her comfort, her public relations strategy, and her commands. She expected the core blood royals to quietly step aside, assuming they were either too exhausted or too afraid of upsetting the king to challenge her quiet administrative maneuvers behind the scenes. But an illusion of power is highly vulnerable to the cold, hard reality of institutional ownership and legal leverage. The trigger for this current crisis began months ago, hidden far beneath the surface of the intense logistical preparations for the king's official birthday parade, known globally as Trooping the Colour. While public attention was heavily focused on the king's adjusted schedule, a profound domestic shift was being engineered behind the scenes. Camilla recognized a stark, uncomfortable reality. As her husband's health necessitated a reduction in his physical participation in the parade, a massive visual vacuum opened, driven by a deep-seated commercial desperation and the terrifying prospect of being visually overshadowed by Prince William and Princess Catherine. Her office quietly initiated a highly sophisticated, unprecedented maneuver. Behind the velvet ropes, Camilla's private office drafted a sweeping broadcast and formation directive, citing the need to protect the dignity of the king's carriage and ensure clear global broadcasting. The paperwork formally requested a dramatic reorganization of the military parade. The directive was designed to effectively push the Prince and Princess of Wales along with the Princess Royal to the visual margins of the procession and the highly anticipated Buckingham Palace balcony appearance. Camilla was attempting to insert herself as the absolute solitary center of the military spectacle. She wanted the camera angles entirely focused on her attempting to use the geopolitical majesty of the British military to artificially elevate her own legacy while quietly starving the Wales family of visual dominance. She expected the household division to quietly rubber stamp the new protocols, without daring to cause an administrative scene that might disrupt the king's peace. But she profoundly underestimated Princess Anne and the unforgiving machinery of the British military apparatus. This is where the story shifts from a tale of petty aesthetic jealousy to a forensic, cold-blooded institutional discovery. Princess Anne is not just the king's sister. She is the senior colonel of the household division and holds the historic, fiercely powerful position of gold stick in waiting. She is the unbreakable protector of the crown's military integrity, a woman who has spent her entire life honoring the exact unyielding protocols her late mother put into place. She approaches the architecture of the monarchy with devastatingly analytical discipline. She views royal spectacles not as personal PR opportunities, but as a sovereign trust that requires absolute structural precision. When the revised parade manifests and camera-blocking charts cross Princess Anne's desk at the Central Military Secretariat, the paper trail immediately unraveled. Princess Anne recognized the maneuver not as a harmless logistical request, but as a staggering exploitation of the sovereign's military spectacle. It was a direct attempt by an unelected, non-blood royal to manipulate the visual hierarchy of the British Armed Forces for personal ego. The Princess Royal did not launch a dramatic family confrontation. She did not scream at Camilla in the grand hallways of Buckingham Palace or leak angry tirades to the tabloid press. The core blood royals operate with a devastatingly analytical and emotionally intelligent restraint. Instead, Anne went directly to the master military protocols of the state. She realized that the greatest weakness of Camilla's strategy is that she possesses absolutely no inherent sovereign or military authority. Every ounce of her power is borrowed and under strict British law. A Queen Consort has absolutely no legal right to mandate the formation of the Sovereign's Guard. Utilizing her absolute legal leverage as gold stick in waiting, Anne engineered a brilliant, silent execution of revenge. She bypassed the Queen Consort's office entirely. With a single silent administrative stroke, Anne utilized centuries-old military martial protocol to permanently veto Camilla's broadcast directive. But the retaliation did not stop at simply voiding a piece of paper. To truly neutralize the illusion of her power, Anne quietly coordinated a sweeping, silent restructuring of the parade that strictly adhered to traditional bloodline hierarchy, executing the purge without ever raising her voice. She instructed the military directors and the BBC broadcast liaisons to strictly follow the sovereign hierarchy, elevating the working bloodline to the visual forefront, which brings us back to that freezing moment on the Horse Guards parade. Camilla, confident that her visual empire was secured and her broadcast dominance guaranteed, rode out expecting absolute adulation. Instead, as the global broadcast began, the trap snapped completely shut. The military formation actively shifted to envelop and diminish her carriage. The cameras naturally tracked the majestic mounted figures of Princess Anne and Prince William, who dominated the visual landscape with effortless sovereign authority. In front of the entire world, Camilla realized that Anne had just used the rigid, unfeeling architecture of the military to publicly amputate her visual ambitions, leaving her completely isolated and entirely overshadowed in the very spectacle she had tried to control. The roar of the crowds echoing across the Horse Guards parade was deafening. But inside the Queen Consort's state carriage, the psychological silence was absolute. The visual humiliation of being flanked and diminished on global television was still burning hot as the procession returned to Buckingham Palace. Camilla retreated immediately to the private royal apartments, bypassing her own staff to demand an urgent audience with King Charles before the highly anticipated balcony appearance. She expected the man who had spent 3 decades bending the entire British establishment to accommodate her presence to finally stand up to his sister and his son. She expected him to immediately summon the Princess Royal, reprimand the military directors, and demand that the balcony blocking be instantly reconfigured to place her at the absolute undisputed center. She wanted Charles to assert his sovereign will over the armed forces and protect his wife's visual pride. But as she delivered her frantic ultimatum, the king simply looked down at the revised military manifests resting on his desk, his expression entirely unreadable, and offered a devastatingly quiet refusal. He did absolutely nothing. This unanswered plea did not represent a minor marital disagreement over a camera angle. It signified a permanent seismic shift in the gravitational centre of the British monarchy for years. Camilla had operated under the dangerous assumption that Charles would always prioritise her pride over the institution's rigorous demands. He had willingly fractured his relationship with the public and alienated his family simply to validate her presence. He had always been willing to burn the house down to keep her warm. But the king is a man deeply aware of his own mortality and the highly scrutinised nature of military pageantry. Charles looked at the meticulous ironclad martial veto executed by the Princess Royal, and he recognised the harsh arithmetic of his position. To overturn Anne's directive would require the king to wage an open, highly public war against the senior colonel of his own household division and the Prince of Wales, right in the middle of a globally broadcast state event. It would mean formally admitting that the British Crown was willing to bypass its own ancient military protocols and compromise the dignity of the armed forces simply to soothe his wife's broadcast insecurities. He realised that the institutional survival of the Crown, the unyielding respect of the military, and his own historical legacy were worth infinitely more than the visual ambitions of his wife. In that freezing, unspoken moment, Charles chose the structural integrity of the state over Camilla. That deafening silence forced the Queen Consort to confront a freezing reality she had successfully ignored since the coronation. To fully comprehend the absolute devastation of this trap, one must unpack the staggering commercial and structural desperation that dictates Camilla's entire existence behind the scenes. Why did she care so deeply about securing the absolute centre of a television broadcast? Because behind the glittering public relations facade and the spectacular military uniforms lies a stark, entirely dependent reality. Legally, structurally, and financially, the Queen Consort owns absolutely nothing within the royal infrastructure. She possesses no royal blood. She does not own the Duchy of Cornwall. She commands no regiments by birthright. Every privilege she enjoys is entirely dependent on her husband's continued survival. Her secret directive to the household division was a frantic, desperate attempt to manufacture actual, untouchable visual leverage that would survive the end of Charles's rule. She was trying to build a permanent, highly lucrative historical narrative by forcing the cameras to record her as the ultimate sovereign authority. By attempting to weave her image so deeply into the fabric of the state's military pageantry, she hoped she could never be marginalised by the next reign. She was attempting to use the visual majesty of the British Armed Forces as a massive, taxpayer-funded promotional campaign for her own fragile legacy. But Princess Anne's ruthless administrative retaliation exposed the sheer emptiness of her title. By officially restructuring the parade and warning off the broadcast directors, Anne did not just defeat her plan, she exposed Camilla to the entire military and aristocratic community as a civilian, attempting to siphon off the geopolitical prestige of the armed forces for private ego. She legally amputated her from the true power centre of the monarchy. Princess Anne and Prince William view the monarchy not as a personal favour, banked to be exploited by a spouse, but as a billion-dollar geopolitical corporation that requires absolute structural precision. They did not execute this retaliation out of petty domestic revenge. They did it because allowing an unelected non-blood royal to conduct unsanctioned visual manipulation of the Sovereign's Guard is a direct threat to the dignity of the British state. They used the unfeeling machinery of martial law to draw an ironclad boundary around the bloodline, proving that while Camilla may wear the crown, she will never be permitted to auction off or manipulate the prestige of the Windsor line. When the balcony doors finally opened for the climax of Trooping the Colour, the architectural reality of the palace completely locked her out. This frantic, desperate overreach stands in devastating contrast to the quiet, undeniable ascension of Catherine, Princess of Wales. While Camilla desperately manipulates broadcast channels and hustles for camera angles to artificially elevate her relevance, Catherine operates with the supreme confidence of absolute inevitability. The Princess of Wales does not need to broker backroom deals with network directors or rewrite military manifests to secure her visual dominance because she is the future of the state itself. When Catherine stepped onto the balcony, the global elite, the military regiments and the cameras naturally gravitated toward her. They do not focus on her because a piece of paper commands them to, but because they recognize her as the true legitimate continuation of Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana's legacy. Despite facing a brutal health crisis and enduring immense public pressure over the past year, Catherine has never demanded broadcast concessions or attempted to hijack the sovereign's military spectacles for private gain. She rests securely in her role, embodying the exact uncomplaining sacrifice and institutional dignity that the crown demands. Princess Anne and Prince William have ensured that the protective dome over the true bloodline is completely impenetrable, leaving the frantic maneuvering of the Queen Consort entirely suffocated by protocol. The subtle shifts occurring within the palace corridors and military barracks are now impossible to ignore. In the aristocratic world, a reorganized parade formation and a sideline balcony placement are never mere logistical accidents. They are broadcasted messages regarding the massive transfer of true power. The foreign ambassadors, the military generals, and the palace staff who once rushed to accommodate Camilla's every preference are now actively reading the room. They saw the household cavalry actively enforcing Princess Anne's blockade right in front of the Queen Consort's face. Live on global television. The military corps and the aristocratic establishment are looking past the current fading reign and quietly, permanently aligning their absolute loyalties with the Prince of Wales and the Princess Royal. The execution of this visual purge was in reality a structural rehearsal for Camilla's eventual obsolescence. The system allowed her to wear the spectacular historic jewels and ride in the state carriage. But the moment she attempted to touch the actual geopolitical machinery of the military to elevate her own image, she was completely isolated. Camilla successfully won the long, bitter war of attrition to become queen. She outlasted public outrage and historical resistance. But the victory is entirely hollow. She is surrounded by the sparkling trappings of ultimate majesty, yet she controls absolutely none of the heavy machinery. She managed to secure the title, but she has definitively, permanently lost the kingdom. Princess Anne and Prince William used the cold, unforgiving administrative protocol of the royal institution to protect the state from a woman who wanted to use the crown for her own visual ego. When the reign eventually changes, Camilla's title will largely disappear into the archives. She will become a dowager, left occupying a position that grows heavier by the day. She will be sitting in magnificent rooms she does not own, holding a title that carries absolutely no historical or geopolitical weight, waiting for a camera flash that will never arrive. The grand illusion has finally dissolved, leaving behind the freezing reality of institutional survival, and the house always wins. Thank you for exploring this deep dive into the hidden power dynamics of the royal institution with us. If you appreciate this level of forensic analysis and storytelling, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. Let me know how you feel about Princess Anne and Prince William stepping up to protect the military integrity of the crown's historic events. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next chapter.